to the battle over the Prouty Garden. Located on the grounds of Children's Hospital in Boston, it's the planned site of an 11-story addition to the hospital. Opponents say raising the garden, where sick kids and their families often spend time, would be like destroying part of the hospital's soul, its power to heal. The hospital says it needs more room, and there'll be a rooftop garden for patients to visit. Today, members of a group called Friends of Prouty Garden met with lawmakers on Beacon Hill to voice their concerns. But as we learned a couple of weeks ago on Boston Public Radio, a man who spent time there as a young cancer patient in the 70s is torn.
I remember going out there in the wooden wheelchair at the time. There is a lot of emotion. There's a lot of love that went into that place. There was no place for my mother or father to sleep if they wanted to stay at me. The Children's Hospital is making a move towards individual rooms for every single patient, so parents can stay with their kids in the room. Because of that, because of the need for expansion to make that happen in Children's Hospital, I support Children's Hospital building where Prouty Garden is.
Joining me are two men who think the mayor reached the wrong conclusion. T-Berry Brazelton, legendary pediatrician. Pleasure to meet you, doctor. Gus Murby, and a volunteer with Friends of Prouty Garden. His son was treated for cancer over years at Children's Hospital, and they both visited frequently. Now, we did invite a representative from Children's, but they declined, saying the story is over and they've gotten all the approvals. Truth be told, that is arrogance with a capital A. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Gus, why does this matter so much to you?
I, several years ago, had occasion to have a son who was treated at Children's, and in the course of that treatment, both he and our family came to understand the Prouty Garden and the value that it can have, especially for a child who's suffering a serious illness and basically feels trapped in a hospital.
He was a teenager, right?
He was a teenager, yeah.
What did the garden mean to him? I mean, if he was sitting here today, what would he say?
You know, I think particularly for teenagers, the hospital represents a prison. People wake them up in the middle of the night to poke them. They sit there and interrupt the end of movies to ask them how their day is going. And they ask the same questions some intern 2 hours before asked them. So being able to get out of the building, get into the fresh air, and get in touch with something that's real and timeless is important.
Is it true that he died in the garden?
We brought him to say goodbye to him in the garden, yes.
Is that where he wanted to be?
That's where at the time, he wasn't in a position to tell us.
I see. Doctor, 70 years at Children's, is that roughly right?
I was out there doing my residency in 48.
That's close to 70 years. Did you go to Beacon Hill today? You did. What did you tell people with whom you met as to why this should be preserved? Why does it matter?
Well, I've seen so many children go through there, and 2 children ashes are out there. I think we ought to be treating it as if it were sacred. And children used to beg me to take them out there. And one little boy said to me, "Doc, if you take me out there, I can look right straight up and see God and not have to look at him through all these dirty old channels." And as he said that, he said, "And I can touch things that are going to be here, whether I'm here or not." And he was dying, and he knew it. And he touched this 150-year-old tree, and he said, "You know, this will be here even if I'm not." And he began to touch it as if they were something special to him.
So throughout your career, did you subscribe to the notion that there is a healing power of nature of places like this?
And I think this is a time for the hospital to realize that if we now say we've made a terrible mistake and we're willing to pay for it, and we can announce this nationally and internationally, we care just as much about children's emotional health as we do about their physical health.
How do you feel about the hospital? I mean, you've served there for, as we said, almost 7 decades.
I think it's like a monument to big business at this point. And I think it's time for us to change, because this garden is unique. There aren't gardens like this anywhere else in the rest of the country.
Can I jump in with something here? The administration of the hospital is trying to run a business, and they have to a degree. Doctors like Dr. Brazelton, there's a lot of them there. And that's the hospital. That's the soul of the hospital.
When you hear the children's told us when we attempted to have them, the story's over, the approvals are done, even though my understanding is Department of Public Health approval yet to come.
That's correct.
When you hear them say the story's over, when there's so many families like yours, so many doctors like Dr. Bray, what does that do to you?
You know what? Several years ago, I heard that and I kind of said, well, I guess they know what they're doing. And then there was a little spark. And so now what I say is, for those who think or are worried that it's over, don't blink.
Yeah, that's right.
Doctor, as much as this matters,
You know, all other doctors that I've talked to over at the hospital are scared to fight this.
why?
Because they are afraid the hospital will retaliate.
Against them as individuals. But what do you say, the hospital, when we did have a representative, a doctor there who actually was on the other side of this, he acknowledged how important the garden was. But what he said to us on the radio several weeks ago is, and I wish the hospital was here to say it themselves, is we appreciate this. We need the space. We need the space for not only more kids, for kids to be able to stay with parents like this. What do you say to that?
That's not true. They own that whole part of Longwood Avenue, and they could build it right next. They could take the old research building and build it right there, move the research right across the street.
So why don't they? Why don't they? If it turns out, I mean,
It's a
there are
big
very few
business.
people is that really what it is? I'm sorry, Gus.
This is the disconnect. The argument that we're making is don't destroy the garden. The argument that comes back is, but we have these pressing medical needs. It's like, yeah, you do, but that doesn't prove why you have to destroy the garden.
What do you do if at the end of the day, let's assume this DPH thing, they say they don't need that's not before the DPH. I know your side says it is. Let's assume you're right and they ultimately say, we're going to give approval for the bulldozing of product. What do you do?
Lie down and make a bull.
Do you?
Well,
Do you?
you know, that's a great question, and I think many of us haven't answered that question for ourselves yet, because that's a bold and a serious move. You know, one of the struggles is you can fight a legal battle. You can win the legal battle. It's the heart. It's the care and compassion of the medical profession that's at stake here. The garden is a manifestation of that. And so it's like, yeah, okay, what if we win the legal battle? If you don't have your heart in making that garden what it is or keeping it what it is, then you haven't won.
But what do you think's behind this? The doctor said it's big business, visited through in Children's Hospital. Is that what you think the rationale is here?
You know, well, there's obviously pressures to run a business. You know what I do when I look at that? I say, what happens when I get to the point in life when I need to pick a hospital and a doctor to take care of me or help me out with things? Do I want the person who's technically proficient and absolutely clinically cold, or do I want the doctor who's going to not only be proficient at what they do, but bring that care and compassion on past what they're capable of doing? That's what I want.
Doctor, you're never giving up this fight, are you? I can tell. Are you?
Thank goodness.
right.
Thank
I didn't
goodness.
think so. Dr. Brazel, it's really an honor to meet
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
doing
Thank you.
this.
And once again, we invited the hospital and they declined.